Have you ever heard of the overview effect? It's a term I just learned about, and I want to read to you what it means. The overview effect is a cognitive shift reported by some astronauts while viewing the Earth from space. Researchers have characterized the effect as a state of awe with self transcendent qualities precipitated by a particularly striking visual stimulus. The most prominent common aspect of personally experiencing the Earth from space are appreciation and perception of beauty, unexpected and even overwhelming emotions, and an increased sense of connection to other people and the Earth as a whole. The effect can cause changes in the observer's self concept and value system and can be very transformative. In summary, the overview effect is how astronauts feel whenever they observe the Earth from space. It's the feeling that they go through whenever they observe this planet called Earth from space. It's said to be a very incredible feeling. It's a feeling that is filled with a deep sense of awe and at the stunning beauty of this planet called Earth. This is what the overview effect is. It is said to be a very transformative experience. Earth, I believe, is one of the most beautiful planets in our solar system. A lot of times people argue that it's Saturn or Earth. So there's this divide. Some people feel it's Saturn, some people feel it's Earth. But those two planets are in deep contention for which one is the most beautiful. I personally believe that Earth is the most beautiful. I personally believe it is. A lot of people look at Saturn and look at the rings and floating rocks that just are around the planet. But then I think a lot of people, an over familiarization with Earth makes them not see the beauty of this planet called Earth. When you look at Earth from space, you see the floating clouds, you see the water, the white against the blue, it glows. And astronauts have said it. When they look at it, it's overwhelmingly beautiful. Now, why am I talking about this overview effect? Because I want to talk about something that I think is important for everyone to understand. I think somebody listening to this podcast needs to understand what I'm going to talk about today. And I pray that God gives me the grace to talk about it in a way that people are not lost. But then, when you look at how stunning the earth is right now, and how just the beauty of the earth can cause some form of self-evaluation in the heart of an astronaut and transform their lives forever. It will amaze you to know that the earth didn't start that way. At least for a lot of people, it might amaze you. Some people, not really. But if you read the Bible, and as I've said, for me, the Bible is my standard. And when I read the Bible tells us the earth didn't start out that way. So when you start from the first book the first chapter of the first book in the Bible. It says in Genesis chapter 1, and I'll start from verse 2. It says, the earth was formless and empty and dark. The earth was formless. The earth was empty. And the earth was dark. All those qualities, all those words used to qualify the earth right now is a sharp contrast to everything the overview effect states about the earth. It says here in the Bible that the earth was formless, empty, and dark. It had none of those blue colors of the ocean and the white colors of the clouds and the green colors of the vegetation and that atmospheric glow. All that was not there at the beginning. So how did we go from formless, dark, and empty to transformatively beautiful? And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the ugly that comes before the glory. The ugly that comes before the glory. And I really believe someone needs to listen to this podcast. This, for somebody listening right now, it's very important that we understand this concept of ugly before glory. Because I've seen and I've heard and I've interacted with quite a number of people that have given up before glory came. Because they do not understand the concept of ugly before glory. I'm reading a book right now, and I've said it on some of my podcasts, some earlier podcasts that I did. It's about the power of habit. It's a book written by Charles Duhigg. It's a very interesting book. And it tells us how habits are formed. And it says there's something called a habit loop. A habit loop. And it has three aspects. Number one aspect is the cue. The cue. It is something that triggers an action. The cue. The cue can be a physical representation. It can be something you see. It can be an emotion you feel, how you feel. It can be something you hear, but something is a cue to make you go into an action. Now, that action is called a routine. It's called a routine. The routine is the action you take after a cue has been given. A cue can be a sound. So you see, when you watch athletics or you watch the 100 meters race or things like that, the whistle and the gun are cues. The action of running only takes place after the cue. Now, so take the gun as a cue. The running is the routine. At the very end of the routine is what we call a reward. The reward is the finish line, that tape at the finish line, your body touching that tape and you breaking that tape, you being the one to break that tape before anybody else can break the tape. This is what is called the habit loop. How we go from cue to reward. every time we enjoy that reward, we anticipate and look forward to the queue. For every time we enjoy a reward, we anticipate and look forward to the queue. And so the queue becomes very exciting. As a matter of fact, the queue now becomes a visual representation, an auditory representation of the reward. So every time we get that queue, it builds anticipation that is called a craving. So you begin to crave the reward even before you perform the action that leads you to the reward. It's a great book, and I would advise anyone to read it. The Power of Habit: Why We Do What We Do in Life and Business, I think, by Charles Duhigg. Now, why do I talk about this habit loop? Because I realize and I've come to understand that with God, there is a habit loop. But a lot of times we are not aware of this habit loop that God has. And so a lot of us are discouraged when we actually should be encouraged, because we do not know God's cue. We look out for the reward, but we do not know the cue and the routine of God. And why I started by talking about the earth and how beautiful it is now, and how ugly and formless and dark it was in the beginning, is because I truly believe that God's cue is ugliness. God's cue is ugliness. God's gun, like in a 100-meter race, the gun for him to run is ugliness. A state of total ugliness. I truly believe that. I believe that Earth is one of the most beautiful planets in our solar system because it was one of the ugliest planets, if not the ugliest planet in the solar system. I believe that Earth today is arguably the most beautiful planet in our solar system because it started out as the ugliest. And wherever there's ugly, God is attracted to it. Whenever there's ugly, God cracks his fingers as a cue to act. You see, God saw the darkness and the ugly state of earth, and it attracted him. Ugly is God's cue, because ugly gives God the eagerness to pour his beauty. The pouring of his beauty is God's routine. When he gets the cue that something is ugly, it prompts God to pour in beauty, to go into routine of pouring in beauty. And the standing back of going from ugly to beautiful is what we call glory. And that is the reward for God. It's because the earth was dark, formless, and empty that God filled it with so much beauty. Beauty that any other planet in our solar system doesn't have. The beauty of vegetation, the beauty of water, the beauty of people. No other planet has it. If they have it in trace amount. Trace. Very little. It's abundant here on earth and growing every single day. But it started with ugly. I believe somebody needs to listen to me here. Some of you are going through very ugly. But instead of seeing God, you are getting discouraged and you want to quit. Because that is what the devil wants you to do. To quit in ugly and formless. But I must have you know that there is an ugly before the glory. It is a pattern. If you read through the Bible, you will see this pattern repeated over and over and over again. Look through the Bible. Look at Abraham's life. Ugly situation of not having a child for years. It was ugly. It was shameful. No child, him and his wife, for years. Till they got into their late years, where it seemed too late. It was through the same Abraham that Isaac came, because God saw the ugly, barren situation. And that was his cue. It had to get ugly before the process of pouring in came. And Isaac came. And from there came a great nation. The glory of God. Cue ugly, routine a pouring in, the glory, the full manifestation. There must be an ugly. There must. There must be an ugly. It has to get ugly before it gets glorious. Ugly is God's cue. Some of you need to embrace your ugly and begin to expect your glory. Because it's a habit loop. That's how it works. Moses in the Bible, when you read the Bible, had to be kicked out of Egypt. It had to get ugly. He grew up in the palace, but that was all beautiful and nice, but it wasn't ugly. And as long as it wasn't ugly, he couldn't get that glory of being a great leader that he is remembered as today. It had to get ugly, had to be a fugitive, had to have blood on his hands, had to be on the run, work as a shepherd. Then God could work and pour in the routine of pouring in his beauty, and then the glory of the deliverance of the Israelites. The ugly before the glory. I don't think any character in the Bible, maybe apart from Jesus, personifies this as much as the character called Joseph. For every time God was about to do something in his life, something ugly preceded it. When he was about to go to Egypt, his brother tried to kill him, threw him in a cistern, sold him as a slave. Very ugly. But that had to happen for him to end up in Potiphar's house. The glory of being the top servant at Potiphar's house could only come after he was thrown away as the least sibling in his father's house. He was seen as the least. Even though he wasn't the youngest, he was seen as the least, as in the most hated. Now in Potiphar's house, He could only get this transition to being governor in Egypt till things got ugly again, where he was accused of sexual molestation and had to be thrown in prison as a convict. It had to get ugly before the glory. I need someone to really understand this. Some of you started the year and things are looking pretty ugly. Pretty ugly. Everywhere you look around, ugliness. Oh, things are so ugly. You do not understand that that's an invitation for God. God cannot ignore the ugly. That's his cue. That is God's cue. The formless, dark earth. That is his cue. That is what makes God pour in his beauty so that his glory can come out. Don't be discouraged by how the year is starting. Don't be discouraged. Starting with rejection, heartbreak, losses. Yeah, it gets ugly before it gets beautiful. Remember that habit loop. There's the ugly, there's the pouring, and then there's the glory. It has always been that way. If you read the Bible, it has always been that way. If you look at the life of David in the Bible, ugly start. In fact, a lot of people believe David in the Bible was looked at like a bastard son. And that's why when Samuel came to anoint the king, they didn't call him out because he was not regarded as a legitimate son. You know, for those of you that watch Game of Thrones, it's almost like the case of Jon Snow. Eddard Stark did not reckon with him as his son. So all other Starks came before him, but he was the chosen one. So he was seen as, his place was ugly, you understand? He wasn't counted in the family. So if they were going to take a family picture, they wouldn't call him. He didn't deserve to be seen. So he was sent away whenever guests came. They didn't see him. So he almost did not exist to the outside world. So it meant that when some people would come to the house, they actually wouldn't know that there was a boy called David in the house. He was meant to be hidden. He was not sent to the field because he was good at field activity. He was sent to the field with the sheep because he was not meant to be seen. Ugly situation. But yet in that, God saw the one he wanted. The most attractive to him became the one whose situation was the ugliest. And he poured in his beauty. And he became one of the greatest kings in the Bible that God always referred to him. Said, if not for David, I would have destroyed you. Glory. God's cue is ugly. The ugly inspires the pouring, and the pouring leads to the glory. Somebody needs to listen to this today. Someone needs to listen. When you read the New Testament, Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding in Cana. And for him to do that miracle, the situation had to be ugly. The wine had to finish. It was not half finished. It was not almost finished. It was all finished. It was an embarrassing situation. It had to be ugly so that Jesus could pour in the beauty, and the glory of the new wine came out. The new wine that nobody could ignore how incredible it was. But the old wine had to finish. There had to be almost a panic of how ugly the situation was. God's queue is ugly. The ugly before the glory. Some of you resist the ugly. And it's a big mistake to resist the ugly. There's a story in the Bible of a man who resisted the ugly because he didn't know God's cue. And I believe that this man was meant to be one of the greatest men in the Bible in terms of influence, in terms of acquisition, in terms of wealth. But this man, we don't even know his name because he resisted the ugly. When we read about this man, it's the story of a rich man who came to Jesus and asked how to better his life. And eventually Jesus told him, go and sell all you have and give to the poor. Become poor. Make your life ugly. It's almost like Jesus was inviting him to make his life ugly. Sell everything. Go from wealthy to wretched. There's a difference between poverty and wretched. You understand? And there's a difference between wealthy and rich. You understand? So there's wealthy, there's rich, and on the other end of the spectrum, there's poverty and there's wretched. There's poor and there's wretched. When God told him to sell everything, he says, have nothing. Become ugly and formless and empty. Become like the earth. Empty. God was giving him the advice of God's cue. Jesus was giving him the advice of his father's cue, the habit cue. Make it ugly first and see my father pour in his beauty and see if the end wouldn't be tremendous glory. But the man didn't understand the cue system of God. And so he went home discouraged because he couldn't see God in the ugly. He couldn't see the ugly inviting God. Somebody needs to listen to me today. It gets ugly before it gets beautiful. That is God's system. Some of you have been believing God has been telling you, you are going to get an amazing job this year. You are going to, maybe not an amazing job. God tells you are going to rise in your career this year. You already have a job. God tells you are going to rise. You believe it's a prompting. You are going to rise in your career this year. So you started the year excited with that word of knowledge that you would rise in your career this year. And on the 15th of February, they tell you that's your last month, give you your dismissal letter. In fact, when they called you to the office, you thought it was promotion. The boss said, let me see you in my office in an hour's time. You're already excited. Oh, God is beginning to work. And he goes and tells you, we are not satisfied with your work. And at the end of this month, we'll give you your severance package. You have to leave. And that's terrible. Terrible. This is not what you expected. This is not what should be happening. Rising in my career should not start with me losing my job. And you are kicked out unceremoniously. Severance package is even too much. No severance package. In fact, they just halt your job. They don't even give you to the end of the month. Pack your desk up today and go. I'm tired of seeing you. Someone lied on you that you did something you didn't do. And as much as you try to explain yourself, it only angers your boss. Get out. And then you go and believing, okay, it might be me just needing to apply for the next job. And you apply and apply. February, you apply. March, you apply. April, you apply. Everybody's rejecting you. When you're not rejected, you are ignored. Ugly. Because of that, you can't pay your rent. You have to go back to living with your parents or squatting with a friend. Doesn't look anything like where you thought would be going. Empty, dark, and formless. But I want to tell you, you are going to end up with the overview effect, where people look at you and their life will just be transformed by the beauty of your life. I'm not trying to preach to anyone. I'm just sharing with you what God has revealed to me. To tell someone not to give up because things are ugly. The ugly is God's VIP invitation into your life. It gets ugly before it gets beautiful. Somebody needs to understand this. Jesus needed to die an ugly death. An ugly death. I don't think there's an accurate representation of how mangled Jesus was on that cross. A lot of people think it was too ugly that artists have decided to put a cloth around him. There was no cloth around him. He was naked. In fact, it was said that before a person was crucified, they were castrated. They were meant to dehumanize them, so they castrated them. They took away their male organs. It was that bad. It was not a sight for kids or anyone. It was a scarring sight. Scarring. It had to get that ugly because of the amazing glory that was to come. You see, no matter how much people try to badmouth Jesus, he's still the most dominant figure in history. Nobody can be more dominant than Jesus in history, whether you believe in him or not. Nobody. Nobody. Because his situation was the ugliest. So the glory was the brightest. I need someone to listen to me today. Do not get discouraged by your situation. Ugly is God's cue. Something beautiful is meant to come. Now, I've told the story of my car before, how I got the car I'm driving right now. And I used to drive a very old Camry. And I said it had big problems, always used to break down. So me and my wife said it's time to change our car. So we started saving towards a car. And every time we tried to save, the prices of cars just continued to skyrocket. And our savings was not increasing. In fact, we kept on going back to spend from our savings. And then ultimately, the car packed up. At least then it will just break down and we'll call the mechanic and we'll fix it up, patch it up, and we'll take it home. But then there was this period, it just packed up. They tried to fix it, it didn't come to life. It just died totally. Then we had no car. We had absolutely no car. It went from manageable to non-existent. We had no car. So I had to go to my parents to borrow one of their cars. So we're using my parents' car. You understand? Borrow their car and living around. We had no car of our own, the family. So we packed it in my parents' the estate where they stay, because we couldn't even get it home. It was that dead. You understand? It was so ugly situation. We had no car. But it was in that place where the car was lying as a carcass that someone said, "Why has your car been there for so many weeks and you haven't moved it?" And I told the person, "The car has packed up. Now we went from having a manageable car to one we are borrowing." You understand? So then when we're using my parents' car, I tell my kids, "Don't stay in the car. Don't do this. Don't do this. We don't want grandma and grandpa to," because it wasn't ours. So the situation went from managing a car to not having one. And the person said, "Tomorrow, we are going together to get a car." As easy as that. He said, "Tomorrow, you and I are going together to get a new car, a better model of this car, a higher model." It gets ugly. It gets ugly before it gets beautiful. A lot of people have ended their lives at ugly. So sad. So sad. They gave up at the dark, formless, empty earth, not knowing the future was for earth to be a symbol in space that strikes up a feeling of incredible awe. It was not to stay ugly. Ugly was the invitation for God to step in. I really hope that someone listens to this podcast, that this is the truth that the devil doesn't want you to know. He wants you to die in January because he knows the glory before December. Please don't die in January. I am begging somebody out there today. Do not die because of the ugly situation right now. God is going to pour in his beauty. Like he did in creation, he will pour it in steps. And it will build up to something that even he would look back and say, it is very good. Do not give up. Do not get tired. Do not fixate on the ugly. God is coming. God is here. God is working. And it makes the ugly eventually beautiful. The ugly before the glory. My name is Tola T.A. Alabi, and this is the TA Podcast.